Okay, so we're carrying on with the McCann-Goldberg interrogation of Stanley. And we got up to this point here where Goldberg deliberately invokes this sense of orthodoxy by saying no society would touch you, not even a building society. And here I think he invokes Stanley's sort of social alienation, but then deliberately utilizes the term of building society. I think that actually robs the concept of society itself of its communal meaning. McCann goes on, he's a traitor to the cloth. And if you look at McCann's contributions here, you're a traitor to the cloth. You verminate the sheet of, what about the Albigensionist heresy? What about the blessed Oliver Plunkett? So we have a number of different things here. You're a traitor to the cloth, obviously, invokes that Stanley in some way has a religious responsibility. And the implication, obviously, is that McCann has this religious responsibility. The cloth we're talking about here, that the uniform of a priest. McCann then goes on to accuse Stanley of participating in the Albigensionist heresy. Now we're talking here about one of the prototypical forms of religious persecution and genocide during what would become the Inquisition. It's actually the eradication of a group of Gnostic Christians in the south of France and across the north of, well, the Catalan area of Spain, really, that were called Cathars, C-A-T-H-A-R. And they were a peace-loving kind of version of Christianity that believed in a number of different things that were slightly more Gnostic in their traditions, but they were wiped out in a political intervention ultimately that had the motive of unifying France eventually and colonizing the land of the south, but was actually really a religious genocide more than anything. So there's this sort of central historical religious genocide in Europe that McCann invokes from the perspective of a sort of Orthodox Catholic. You know, that he sees the Albigensionist genocide as a heresy, and then immediately segues into the blessed Oliver Plunkett. You know, the man associated with Irish nationalism. Whilst Goldberg is busy accusing him of watering the wicket in Melbourne, so cheating in the context of cricket and sports. And I think this mixture of discourses that they invoke to victimize Stanley obviously highlights the insufficiency of each one on its own, and identifies the coherence between forms of persecution and the forms of orthodoxy that ultimately constitute power. Further down, we segue then into this ludicrous, kind of banal moment in the text where we segue into the chicken cross the road joke, this kind of archetypal, unanswerable question. Why did the chicken cross the road? We know that this joke is being used because it's unanswerable. You know, the premise of the joke dictates that we aren't able to know the answer of this, because otherwise there's absolutely no purpose of forming humour from this. And so the joke itself ends up constituting some form of power-based hierarchy, whereby within this particular form of joke, there is the assumption, I think, of superiority on the person asking the question, in that they are able to invoke a sense of ignorance in the person to whom the joke is addressed, and they are also enabled in their effort to undermine whichever individual or group of people becomes the subject for the joke itself. And so we have this exposure, I think, of jokes as a sort of nakedly hierarchical endeavour. Stanley's losing his articulacy here. He wanted to. He doesn't know. Why did the chicken cross the road? He wanted to. Why did the chicken cross the road? He doesn't know. He doesn't know which came first. And a number of different things are going on here in terms of the construction of Pinter's aesthetic in the play. We have this suggestion, first of all, that actually we segue from kind of prototypical genocide seamlessly into this banal joke. But it's important that the jokes are a form of power themselves and that the questions that the jokes rely upon are ultimately unanswerable. So this question here is an unanswerable cue. And Stanley's gradual deterioration of articulacy, again, reveals that gradual loss of self, but also the way in which the joke itself has no possible answer. You know, it's exposing here that a typically ritualistic form of language that deliberately actually requires the opposite of the way that it's constructed grammatically. So we have a deliberately unanswerable question being used as a method of torture. And I think what this really shows to us is the tortuous nature of banal everyday language that's used throughout the play. And then this which came first, the chicken or the egg, sort of farce that this descends into, I think ultimately makes this both everyday and horrifying at the same time, that we see this cliched language as the source of a psychic breakdown. And that by doing so, the everyday language becomes horrifying. But we also then see how fragile the self can be in terms of the language that is necessitated by this context of interrogation. The language that can be used to break someone down is ultimately banal because there is no possible answer to the questions, which came first, the chicken or the egg. It's the kind of ultimate banal sort of philosophical quandary. And it's simply the fact that it's unanswerable that causes Stanley's sort of psychic breakdown. And this scream is important. And I think this is the impossibility of knowledge outside of the self. But here, Stanley's lack of knowledge, I think, makes the interrogation scene move in this direction. So this scream is a sort of existential cry, I think, for the impossibility of external epistemology, for knowledge outside of the boundaries of the individual. And that scream is therefore a sort of lament in many ways for the loss of self that knowledge or that understanding necessitates, that we actually can't know things beyond ourselves and that all of our questions are unanswerable. And Goldberg says he doesn't know again. Do you know your own face? And this is as if we weren't aware that this was actually a kind of segue into something slightly more metaphorical. This immediately convinces us otherwise. Do you know your own face? Wake him up, stick a needle in his eye. You're a plague webber, you're an overthrow. You're what's left. But we've got the answer to you. We can sterilize you. So again, we've got this shift here from plague to rebellion and the answer and sterilization. Again, remember this is in the context of the immediate aftermath in the Second World War, really. And we've got this, well, not the immediate aftermath, but a kind of decade or so afterwards, 2 decades maybe. That on the back of Nazi genocide, this language has a very deliberate political connotation. And then we shift through a variety of various accusations. McCann is back in Ireland. What about Drogheda? Your bite is dead. Only your pong is left. You know that he's an animal here. You betrayed our land. You betrayed our breed. Constantly Goldberg is invoking race and McCann invoking Irish nationalism. Who are you, Webber? What makes you think you exist? And this is where we get to the point, actually, of an ontological quandary. That he's free from the binds that delude us into feeling a sense of belonging, Stanley. And that this is an effort to expose that. What makes you think you exist if you aren't, therefore, showing some form of commitment to the ideologies and the discourses that are used to represent them, like us? You know, if you're not invoking, for example, race and Irish nationalism and villainizing things outside of your own immediate category, what then makes you exist? What makes you think you're who you are? Because the self is this great, intangible, unknowable entity. And this is what McCann and Goldberg articulate. You're dead, you can't live, you can't think, you can't love, you're dead, you're a plague gone bad, there's no juice in you, you're nothing but an odour. and then silence, and they stand over him. And he's crouched in the chair. He looks up slowly and kicks Goldberg in the stomach. Goldberg falls. Stanley stands. McCann seizes a chair and lifts it above his head. Stanley seizes a chair and covers his head with it. McCann and Stanley circle. So here what we see, I think, is the failure of Stanley's expression in the moment of silence. And they stand over him, and he's crouched in the chair. But then he does actually kick out at Goldberg, and I think that's where, he's degenerated into a state of savagery. And we see that through his loss of articulacy. And that at that moment in time, McCann's actual honest motives in this interrogation are nakedly exposed here, where he seizes a chair and is threatening to smash it over Stanley's head. And then again, he invokes this sense of betrayal, right? Judas, as if he's some kind of traitor of a religious creed. Stanley, again, if you think about the degeneration of his language, it sort of mirrors Othello's in many ways. This in a much more explicit way. His linguistic degeneration is important here. Again, it's this loss of identity, well, not a loss of identity, but a loss of an ability to communicate, an ability to participate in some form of civilized society. Now, when we have Goldberg calming McCann down, that sinister intent is fully exposed. That we've got Goldberg, this sort of archetypal villain in this play, trying to calm McCann down. The bastard sweat pig is sweating. He's got this extremely hostile, sort of brutalized, animalistic language that is designed to reveal, I think, the zeal of McCann's hatred. A loud drumbeat off left deliberately creates this sort of surrealistic comment on the on the menace that's being exposed in these lines, the sense of dangerous menace. But again, you have this moment of surrealistic nightmare, that we have this sort of militant sound effect that's exposing the kind of tyrannical, almost sort of fascistic interrogation that's going on. But it's actually emerging from banal sort of natural realism. And that what we then, through this aesthetic, are being given is that danger lurking beneath the surface of the everyday. A loud drumbeat off left descending the stairs as if the drumbeat itself, this disembodied sound, offering the sense of threat and menace, is precisely what is traumatizing and horrifying Stanley. Goldberg takes the chair from Stanley. They put the chairs down. They stop still. Enter Meg in evening dress, holding sticks and a drum. So we have this, sudden shift from surrealistic menace to sort of banal everyday naturalism. That this is the moment where the party begins, is that moment of violent threat to Stanley's sense of self. And that there we have then, that we're segueing into this farcical, ironic treatment of the ritual of a birthday party as a celebration, supposedly, of individual identity and the affirmation of individual identity. Here, being suggested through that sound effect in the stagecraft, that we've got the surrealistic nightmare of the interrogation being stitched seamlessly into the sort of banal naturalism of the birthday party. Very, I think, intelligently through this single piece of stage direction. And I think, in many ways, this offers a contrast with the way that Blanche's psychic treatment is handled in Streetcar, because we have this constant insistence that the external features of the sound and the stagecraft are actually internal in Blanche's everyday world. But actually what we are being given here is a deliberate conflation of our own sense of external surreal nightmare that we experience as the audience watching the play, with the banal everyday naturalism that is such an important feature of Pinter's aesthetic.